The genetic code of 15 million people was going up for auction. Not a building, not a patent, not a drug. Their actual DNA spit into a little tube years earlier, just to find out where their ancestors came from. Now the single most valuable asset of a company that had run out of money. When 23andMe filed for bankruptcy in March 2025, that database of human DNA became something to be sold off to whoever bid the most. And 28 state attorneys general went to court to try to stop the sale, arguing the company could not put millions of people's genetic information on the block without their consent. Tonight, the story of a company that was once worth almost $6 billion. It sold the dream of reading your own DNA for $99 and then ran headfirst into the flaw buried inside its own business. You only buy a DNA test once. It never made a profit, not in 19 years. It burned through nearly $1.8 billion. It got hacked, exposing the data of nearly 7 million people. Its entire board of directors quit on a single day. And when it finally collapsed, the founder who had steered it the whole way down bought the company back through a nonprofit she had created just 6 weeks earlier. So tonight, the question this channel always asks: when 23andMe collapsed, who got rich, who got hacked, and who got sold? To understand the fall, you have to start with how genuinely exciting this company once was. In 2006, a woman named Wojcicki co-founded 23andMe with a radical pitch that ordinary people, not just scientists, should be able to read their own genetic code. You order a kit. You spit into a tube. You mail it back. And a few weeks later, you log in to discover your ancestry, your ethnic makeup, and your risk for certain diseases, all written in your own DNA. The original test cost $999. Over time, that price fell to $99. It was the kind of idea that felt like the future. And the company had the connections to match the dream. One of its earliest investors was Google. The search giant put in money in 2007, at a time when Google's co-founder Sergey Brin was married to Wojcicki. In 2008, Time magazine named the spit test its invention of the year. There were setbacks. In 2013, the Food and Drug Administration ordered 23andMe to stop giving customers health risk reports because it hadn't proven they were accurate. The company pulled back, worked with regulators, and eventually won approval to offer them again. By the late 2010s, 23andMe was the name in consumer DNA, but a database of human genetic information is worth far more than $99 a kit, and Wojcicki knew it. The real prize was using all that DNA to discover new drugs. In 2018, the pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline paid $300 million for exclusive access to 23andMe's database to hunt for the genetic roots of disease. With extensions, GSK would ultimately pay around $370 million. Your spit, it turned out, was research material for the drug industry. Then came the moment that should have set the company up for life, and instead set the trap. In February 2021, 23andMe announced it would go public by merging with a blank check company, a SPAC run by the billionaire Richard Branson. The deal valued the company at $3.5 billion. When the stock began trading that summer, it climbed, and 23andMe's market value peaked near $6 billion. And Wojcicki was, on paper, a billionaire. But look closely at who actually won in that moment, because this is the pattern of the SPAC era. The sponsor of the blank check company, Branson's Group, received what are called founder shares, a large slice of the company for next to nothing, a structure that can be worth tens or even hundreds of millions the day the deal closes. The early venture capital investors who had bought in years earlier at far lower valuations finally got their chance to cash out at the top. And the retail investors, ordinary people who bought the stock at $10 a share because SPACs were marketed as the democratic way to get in early. Those people bought at the peak. Hold that thought, because we are going to come back to where they ended up. Because underneath the $6 billion valuation was that flaw, the one no amount of money could fix. You buy a DNA test once. Once you know your ancestry, you don't need to find it out again. So every year, 23andMe had to find brand new customers just to stay flat, and the pool of people who hadn't yet taken a test kept shrinking. Revenue didn't grow. It sagged from about $300 million in one fiscal year to roughly $220 million the next. And the company never, in 19 years turned an annual profit. All told, it would burn through about $1.79 billion. To escape the trap, 23andMe went shopping. In 2021, at the height of its value, it bought a telehealth company called Lemonade Health for $400 million, trying to turn one-time DNA buyers into monthly healthcare subscribers. It didn't work. In the bankruptcy, Lemonade would be sold off for just $10 million. A $400 million purchase, resold for $10. And the big pharma bet faded too. In 2023, GlaxoSmithKline ended its partnership without a single approved drug to show for it. And then, in October 2023, came the breach. Hackers used a technique called credential stuffing, taking passwords leaked from other websites and trying them on 23andMe accounts. Because many people reuse passwords, it worked. The attackers got into roughly 6.9 million customer accounts. And this was not a quick smash and grab. Investigators later determined the hackers had been inside the system for about 5 months before anyone noticed. The company only began investigating after stolen data showed up for sale on the dark web, including lists that specifically targeted people of Chinese and Ashkenazi Jewish descent. For a company whose entire product was trust with your most personal information, it was devastating. The stock, already sliding, fell below $1. And here is what makes a genetic breach different from any other. If a hacker steals your password, you change it. If they steal your credit card, the bank issues a new one. But you cannot change your DNA. It is the one piece of data about you that is permanent, that you can never reset and that you share, whether you like it or not, with your parents, your siblings, and your children. When 23andMe lost control of that information, it wasn't just the customers who were exposed. It was their entire bloodline, including relatives who had never signed up for anything. A leaked password is an inconvenience. A leaked genome is forever. Now the company began to come apart from the inside, and the way it happened is almost without precedent. The problem was control. From the beginning, 23andMe had been built with a dual-class share structure, a setup that gave Wojcicki special shares structure, a setup that gave Wojcicki special shares with extra votes. By 2024, those shares gave her control of nearly half of all shareholder votes. In practice, that meant she could not be overruled. So when she began pushing to take the collapsing company private, buying it back at a fraction of its former price, the independent directors on the board concluded there was nothing they could actually do to direct the company against her wishes. And on September 17, 2024, they did something boards almost never do. All 7 of them resigned on the same day. In a single act, among them was Roelof Botha, one of the most respected venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, from the firm Sequoia. Their message was unmistakable. We cannot govern a company when one person holds all the power and the company is heading off a cliff. What followed was the slow-motion end. To avoid being kicked off the stock exchange for a share price that had collapsed, the company did a reverse split, bundling every 20 shares into one. It laid off 40% of its staff and shut down its drug development arm entirely. A company that had once employed more than 800 people was down to around 300. And on March 23, 2025, 23andMe filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in a federal court in Missouri. And Wojcicki resigned as chief executive the same day. Which brings us to the auction, and to the strangest ending in this entire story. With the company in bankruptcy, its assets, above all that database of 15 million people's DNA, went up for sale. First, the pharmaceutical company Regeneron won the bidding at $256 million. But then the auction was reopened because a new bidder had emerged with a higher offer, $305 million. That bidder was a nonprofit called TTAM Research Institute. And TTAM had been founded about 6 weeks earlier by Wojcicki, the same person who had co-founded 23andMe, run it as CEO through its entire decline, controlled its votes, and resigned the day it filed for bankruptcy, was now buying it back through a non-profit she had just created. The court approved the sale, but only after attaching binding privacy conditions, and only after that coalition of 28 attorneys general had forced the question of consent into the open. Sit with what that auction actually meant for an ordinary customer. Years earlier, you had spit in a tube to find out if you were part Irish or to connect with a cousin you'd never met. You ticked a box agreeing to let your DNA be used for research. You never imagined that one day a bankruptcy judge in a courtroom in Missouri would be deciding which corporation got to own that sample next, and that the only thing standing between your genome and the highest bidder was a group of state lawyers filing emergency objections. Hundreds of thousands of people, by one count, close to 2 million, rushed to delete their data once they understood. But for most, the information was already out, already copied, already part of an asset being fought over by strangers. So now, the full receipt. Who got rich and who got sold? The retail investors, the ordinary people who bought the stock at $10 a share when it went public, were wiped out, down roughly 99.6%. The early venture investors and the SPAC sponsor had their chance to take money off the table years before, at the top. That is the SPAC story in one sentence. The insiders get their liquidity at the announcement, and the public holds the stock all the way down. The 6.9 million people exposed in the breach were left to share a settlement of up to $50 million, finally approved in January 2026. An amount that comes out to just a few dollars each. The hundreds of employees laid off across 5 separate rounds lost their jobs, and the 15 million customers who had simply wanted to know their ancestry watched their genetic code become a line item in a bankruptcy auction, fought over in court like office furniture. And Wojcicki, she ended up back in control of the company's assets and its database, now wrapped inside a nonprofit. The mission-driven story was restored, the founder rescuing the science from the wreckage. But the questions did not go away. In May 2026, the state of California sued the new entity over that same 2023 breach, alleging it had failed to protect customers and misled them about what happened. The data didn't disappear when the company went bankrupt. It just got a new owner and a new label. Here is what 23andMe got right, and what it never solved. It was a genuinely visionary product. It really did let millions of people read their own DNA, and it built one of the largest genetic databases on Earth. But it was a one-time sale dressed up as a forever business, propped up by a $6 billion bubble that insiders cashed in on and the public paid for. When the bubble burst, the only thing of real value left was the one thing customers had trusted it with most, themselves. And that, in the end, is what was put up for sale.